Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Public Safety Advisory Board meeting for July 22nd. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with State of California Executive Order N-29-20 dated March 17th, 2020, and State of California Executive Order N-08-21. All members of the PSAB are participating in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting may do so through this Zoom webinar. I believe YouTube is not working currently. Melvin, let us know if that changes at any point. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments online during the public comment period for an item through this webinar or by phone by dialing 669-900-9128 and entering webinar ID 988-2806-4856. Any emails received by 4:30 p.m. today were forwarded to the PSAB. Emails received after 4:30 p.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the record for the meeting. With that, Mr. Gaines, can you take roll call, please?
Yes. Chair Iyer.
Present.
Vice Chair Frink. Vice Chair Frink is not here. Member Wang.
Present.
Member Brodowski.
Present.
Member Tang.
Present.
Member Langton.
Present.
And Member Sandhu informed me that he would be about 20 minutes late, so he's not here yet.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. We'll now move on to item 3, which is oral communications. Item 3 is oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the subcommittee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the PSAB from acting on non-agendized items. At this point, would any member of the public like to provide comment on an item that is not on the agenda? And I will check and see. I do want to mention to the public that we will have a clock. It's kind of a it's kind of Captain Canfield's cell phone clock, and he will hold it up when you have 30 seconds left. So you can look to the window to keep track of your time. As soon as you read 0, there will be no warning and you will be cut off. Okay, so please be aware of that clock going. So let me check and see if there's any folks who would like to speak. I would like to recognize Ms. Petey. Please go ahead with your comment.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for making the time tonight. I just want to say thanks for being here, and thank you for trying to make sure that these meetings are efficient. And in the spirit of that, I'll keep this brief, but I want to make sure that in the interest of having this conversation be back and forth and include the public in a meaningful way, please consider keeping public comments at 3 minutes as often as possible. You know, a lot of commenters could mean high interest in a particular issue. I think that commenters tend to get more precious with their minutes when they feel their minutes are scarce, but having a full 3 minutes to make, if there are 3 minutes of topics, can be really useful, especially since there's some really thoughtful things on this agenda. You know, perhaps you could indicate to the public, keep things briefer, don't use the full time if they don't need it, but something like, you know, continuing to have the 3 minutes, but encouraging residents to stop around 2 minutes or so could be useful. I appreciate the 9 p.m. deadline. We all like an early bedtime, but please also be willing to go longer than 9 p.m. if there's significant community interest and significant important issues facing our community that deserve longer consideration. Thanks so much. See ya.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Salim Demirji, who has a question or comment.
Hi, yeah, is now a good time to ask or to give feedback on the SRO survey, or will there be another opportunity for public comment then?
There will be public comment following that agenda item.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'd like to recognize Mr. Bruce England. Please go ahead.
I don't get to be a member?
Not today.
Okay. Hi, all. Yeah, two things. This is a question, and that's actually related to the later agenda item, the SRO program. And the reason I want to ask it now is because it can have some bearing on the questions and comments later. If I can get an answer, that would be great. It's a very simple one. The SRO officers, are they subject to overtime? Do they typically, or do they ever get overtime? I would think not, because they probably have a defined work schedule, and so overtime doesn't come into play. I'd really be interested in knowing that up front. And then lastly, because you're a new advisory body and I've been following your meetings and paying close attention to them, I like hearing what everybody has to say. It's some members I know more about your stands and your views and the things that have priority for you than others. So I would just personally encourage all to participate fully in the discussions and then make decisions based on consensus as much as you possibly can. And maybe that's obvious, but I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McKenzie, please go ahead.
I just wanted to give a public recognition and thank you for Melvin Gaines. We are in Mountain View very lucky to have you. You are a treasure. You very rapid response to questions that I sent through the public email, and I just wanted to give public appreciation and thank you very much for it. And thank all of you for your service on the board. It's great to see you here and hear this conversation, be part of it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Demergy, you still have your hand raised. Do you have another question, or is that a remnant of before? Oh, it disappeared. So I guess it was a remnant. Okay. Just checking to see if there's anyone else. I don't see any other hands raised. So we will now close the oral communication item. And just before we move to the next discussion action item, I would like to reiterate what I heard from the public, not to discuss, not to answer, but just what I heard, so that you all know that we on the board do take your public comments seriously and that we are listening. So I heard that there was a request to please consider keeping public comment open, especially on those items of great interest, to 3 minutes. And also do not, if possible, if things are interesting and people are participating, don't look at 2 hours as the ending of the meeting. I think I do want to say, I think the last meeting we had in June is proof that we don't limit this meeting to 2 hours. There was a question about whether SROs are subject to overtime, and I'm sure we can address that in the SRO section. There was also an encouragement for folks on the PSAB to participate fully and act on consensus. There was some public love from Tim McKenzie, and we will be referring to Melvin going forward as Mr. Treasure. So with that, I'd like to move on to item 4, minutes approval. Okay, so the first set of minutes is the PSAB minutes, meeting minutes from May 27th, 2021. Does anyone have any comments or questions about the May 27th meeting minutes? Okay, if no one has any questions, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the May 27th meeting minutes? Okay, Derek's making a motion. Would anyone like to second that motion? Okay.
Second.
Thank you, Member Tang. All in favor of approving the May 27th meeting minutes? Can you raise your hands? Okay, all right, thank you. Let's move on to PSAB meeting minutes for June 24th, 2021. Does anyone have any comments or questions about the June 24th meeting minutes? I don't see anything. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the June 24th meeting minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you, Member Tang. Could someone second that motion? Okay, all in favor of approving the June 24th meeting minutes, raise your hands. Okay, with that, I think this discussion item is completed. Okay, so let's move on to item number 5, which is discussion action items. There are 3 discussion action items on the agenda tonight. I would like to propose to change the order that we discuss these items in from the order listed on the agenda. And the reason being is I think that the HRC Community Listening Forum and the School Resource Officer Subcommittee update will actually be important information for us to take into consideration for the work plan agenda item. So basically what I'm suggesting is to move item 5.2, the HRC Community Listening Forum on Local Policing Report discussion, to be first. And then item 5.3, School Resource Officer Subcommittee update, to be second. And current item 5.1, PSAB fiscal year 2021-22 work plan development, to be third. If this is okay with everyone else, could someone move to modify the agenda order?
I so move.
Okay, thank you. Could someone second that?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of changing the order of that we discuss these items, please raise your hands. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so with that, we will start with the new 5.1, which is the HRC Community Listening Forum on Local Policing Report discussion. We are joined this evening by Audrey Ramberg, Assistant City Manager, Chief Operating Officer, and Ida Rose Sylvester from the Human Relations Commission, who will provide a presentation on the HRC Community Listening Forum on Local Policing Report. Is there anyone else, Ms. Ramberg, that I may have missed?
Yes, thank you, Chair Iyer. We also have from the HRC Subcommittee, Annette Lynn and Julie Solomon. So Melvin, if you wouldn't mind promoting them into the panelist box so we can see everyone's lovely faces. I will be making the presentation and they are available to assist with questions at the Commission's pleasure.
Wonderful.
So with that, I'm going to share my screen and start my slideshow. Does everyone see the slides? Very good. Well, good evening, members of the Public Safety Advisory Board. It's great to be with you this evening, and I am happy to be representing the Human Relations Commission Subcommittee. I am a staff liaison to that commission, and I worked very closely with the subcommittee of that commission to plan and implement and analyze the engagement opportunities and the stories shared through those engagement opportunities relating to the experience of Mountain View community members with Mountain View policing. I am really happy to be joined tonight by the 3 subcommittee members that were previously introduced to you. In order to help plan and facilitate those engagement opportunities, we did work with the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center that have a long history of engaging community in problem solving and community building, and also a long history of police community relations work. And so we were really happy to have their assistance. We launched the engagement process in August of 2020. Hard to believe that was already almost a year ago. And it concluded with a report out session to the community in November of the findings of the engagement. I'm going to provide a brief summary, and as I mentioned, we're happy to answer questions. The objectives of the engagement were twofold. To hear the stories of Mountain View community members about their experiences interacting with our police department, and just then share that information from those stories with the council and with the police department. The process was not designed with the rigor of an academic research project. You know, I can't speak in the terms that PhD candidate Alex Stevenson uses when he talks with you. But we do feel it provides important insight on the experiences and perspectives of a number of people who chose to participate in the process and whose voices might otherwise not have been heard. And it really does give us a good opportunity to see what areas might benefit from further exploration. So the process was aimed to engage people who live, work, or spend time in Mountain View who have had experience with the police in Mountain View. It wasn't meant to gather general community impressions about policing in general, or even about Mountain View Police. It was really trying to hear people who could tell their own stories of what it has been like for them to interact with our police department. We did extensive outreach to inform the community about the opportunity to participate, and really encourage that participation through a wide number of outreach efforts. We gave people many different ways to participate, trying to recognize that there are different preferences, different limitations. So we had forums, we had an online platform if people didn't want to be in person. And then we also had one-on-one interviews for people for whom the technology of forums and the online portal created a barrier. And by forums, I think, we all can take for granted, unfortunately, that just about everything that happened in engagement last year was virtual, was online. These were not in-person forums. They were designed to reach different constituent groups. We led one in Spanish, we led one in Mandarin, and then another was led in English, but focused on youth. And we had the interviews in particular focused around harder to reach populations, including homeless and unstably housed residents. And I would like to give great thanks to Ida Rose and Julie and Annette, for they are the ones who went into the community and conducted those interviews. For each of these methods of gathering stories, we had 3 things that we wanted people to tell us, or 4 things. What their interaction was with the police department and what happened during that experience, what could be improved in further interactions, and how that experience may have impacted their perspective about future interactions with the police department. So in terms of the total participation, what we collected were 181 stories. That doesn't mean 181 people, because people could tell, actually that was 181 people. But we then took the information from those people and recognized that their stories broke into different themes. And we have therefore more than 181 counts of different themes. The largest number of participants were through the listening forums, followed by the online story portal, and then the one-on-one interviews. And through these stories, the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center reviewed the notes from all of the forum facilitators, the written comments, the interview transcripts, and they identified keywords that were raised in those stories, and then they grouped them into themes. And then they counted each time that theme came up across the different stories. There was an analytical approach that Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center used to do this, but obvious as you would probably imagine, some subjectivity in terms of the assigning of the keywords and the grouping into themes. There also, it should be noted, there are overlap and interrelationship between the themes, and that some stories could be both positive and negative, and therefore have both positive and negative themes within them. One person's story could have multiple themes. I think it's another important caveat is that our resident expert in surveying and analysis and evaluation is Commissioner Julie Solomon, that this was what was referred to as a convenience sample. We didn't go out and particularly and make an attempt to create a representative sample of the Mountain View community. And so the results of this effort can't be generalized to the community as a whole. And there are some things that we would want to keep in mind that could limit the way that people participated or whether they were even willing to participate. I've already mentioned the technological barriers that there might be, but with very personal and perhaps painful experiences that people may have had, that could have created reluctance to come forward and speak. And people who have neutral or positive experiences, sometimes it's not that they're not comfortable, they're just not motivated to participate. And so both of those things could be factors in the sample of participants. Nonetheless, given those caveats, it still is a good set of data of people's actual lived experiences that they were willing to share with us. And they do reflect the voices of members of our community. So the last couple of slides I want to do is summarizing. I know you all received a copy of the report. I believe you got it in this packet. You may have even received it in your prior meeting packet as well. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into these things. I think the purpose of having this on your agenda is so that you can be refreshed in your memory and your awareness of what came up during the listening forums, so that if you have things that you feel are worth considering for further thought and exploration, and therefore possible prioritization on your work plan, that you can do that. And probably you would do that during your work plan item as opposed to during this item, but this at least gives you the kind of grounding of information for you to be able to do that if you so desire. So the expressions of satisfaction and expressions of concern or areas for improvement were the two broad categories of that the themes fell under. And in satisfaction, there was the largest number, which were general expressions of satisfaction. And these were basically stories where people, through unspecified or non-detailed interactions with the police, had appreciation or satisfaction with the police. The next was 21 mentions for positive community relations. And these were stories where people felt satisfied, or rather, I'm sorry, that the presence of police in the community was a positive thing. It built trust. It left a positive impression, the ways in which the police were participating and present in the community. There were 21 mentions, 12 mentions for helpful police assistance, which is where the police interacted with the storyteller to solve a problem or provide assistance that the storyteller felt was helpful. The next was 10 mentions for pleasant police interactions, where it wasn't around solving a particular issue or a call for service, but maybe just kind of a meet up and a friendly interaction that people felt was positive and pleasant. And so those were the highest number of mentions, and I will move on. Actually, I probably should, even though it was just 3 mentions, since I know you are looking at the school resource officer program. There were 3 mentions by parents about their liking and feeling safe with school resource officers being on school campus. So the next category broadly is expressions of concern or need for improvement, with the most frequent mentions at 43, 42, and 41, with 43 relating to what was categorized as domineering police behavior. And these are stories where the storyteller felt that the police acted in a way that was rude or overbearing or arrogant. 42 mentions for race-based or biased policing. And these were stories where the police were perceived to be contacting people because of their race or having been called to respond to an issue because of a person's race, or treating a person in a way that was different because of their race. And and not just race, but socioeconomic characteristics were part of those stories. 41 mentions for where stories of police not being the appropriate personnel, but rather another type of help would have been better to respond to a call for service. And this was primarily around mental health needs, but also related to the presence of school resource officers on school campuses working with youth. 35 mentions for the need for police training. And these were stories suggesting that more training or better training or different kinds of training would improve interpersonal skills, which I guess relates back to the perception of being treated, brusquely and in an overbearing manner, or to just reduce other kinds of concerning police behavior. There were 34 mentions of lack of trust in police, and these were stories where people felt threatened by the police and said that they didn't want to contact them because they didn't feel comfortable with the police or they feared there'd be some kind of escalation of the situation. There were 27 mentions of negative community relations. This is kind of the flip side of the coin of the positive community relations in the prior slide, where people felt just the way that the police were present in the community created a negative impression, not a positive one. And then the last one I'll go through is the need for police accountability and transparency with 23 mentions. And these were stories where people wanted to understand police practices and policies better, wanted to have a more satisfactory way to address complaints and those kinds of things. So my last slide, I just wanted to share with you some of the things that have happened since that report out to the community in November. The report findings were presented to the council's Race, Equity, and Inclusion Subcommittee and also to the City Council. The Human Relations Commission had updates on a number of their agendas regarding the work of the Listening Forum Subcommittee. That subcommittee had a meeting with the command staff of the police department to go over the report. It was shared with the PhD research fellow, and it's been posted on our city website. So with that, I'm concluding my comments and we'll stop sharing my screen and happy to address any questions that commissioners may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Ramberg. Do any PSAB members at this time have questions for Ms. Ramberg or any of the HRC commissioners? Jeanette, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. And I was wondering if there are any, I forgot what they're called, but like if we happen to know any like more personal information about the people in the forums, which I totally understand if we don't. And I'm kind of wondering if there was anything, like any trends about different treatments based on the areas that people live in Mountain View.
I'll take a first pass at that and then invite my colleagues and friends from the HRC to comment. We made a very strong commitment to keep the identities of the people sharing the stories confidential. Obviously, they couldn't be anonymous if they were on a forum, but nothing that was said was attributed to any particular person. And we didn't really collect demographic information. I mean, we could observe what we could observe in the forums, but for the online platform, we didn't collect that information. So we don't really have an ability to break the data down into different kinds of groups, including location of where people live within the city. The interviews probably are easier to identify by location, and especially as they there were several of folks who are living in vehicles, and at least where they lived at that time could be identified. So let me pause and see if Ida Rose, Julie, or Annette would like to add anything. Chair, do you want me to acknowledge these folks or do you want to do that?
Either way, either
All
way.
right, Ida Rose.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for your presentation. And I'll just take a quick stab at the question. Well, we didn't collect, the where were you when this happened. We did certainly hear at times where things happened. But most importantly, I want to stress that we did talk to a wide range of community members, all genders, all ages, all races. And we met people, like Audrey talked about, where they were in many cases, and many came to us. I feel we did a really good blanket of the entire geographic city in many respects.
Thank you. Julia or Annette, anything else? Hi, Julie.
Hi. Excuse me. Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for having us here. Yes, I would just have just a couple of small points. For the listening forums, we did collect some demographic data on those who signed up, and that was optional. Folks did not have to respond to those items. One of the challenges, however, was that the people who signed up in advance and the people who actually attended the forums were not exactly the same group. And then also PCRC, who facilitated the forums, did do some polls, anonymous polling of demographics during the forums. But again, that was optional and not that many people chose to participate in those polls. So I just wanted to make the point that we did make some attempt to get some general demographic information for the forums themselves. And then I would say for the interviews, we did get some demographic data that folks chose to share with us. And for the anonymous stories that were submitted via the portal, we did not ask for any information. Some people incidentally chose to share it, but we didn't ask for it because we were intentionally trying to make that process as anonymous as possible so that people would feel comfortable to share. Thank you.
Member Tang, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you. This comment is more directed towards the members of the HRC. I guess it's kind of a two-part question. First would be like, having gone through this process, what key takeaways and overall, I guess, insights have you taken away from this process? And also, it's one thing to collect this kind of data, but it's another thing to do something with it. So I'm wondering what kind of suggestions you might have for the PSAB for the work plan to do something with what you've collected.
Ida Rose, do you want to kick us off?
I think I will. It's a big, big question. So thank you very much for that very thoughtful question, Eva. I guess I'll take it in two parts, although my responses are pretty much linked. When we did this work, we knew that we would be uncovering nuggets of where issues and opportunities and where good things were happening as well. So if you look at the survey, I think some of the things, if you look at it as a survey, some of the things that we picked out with that there are notable issues that certain community groups have, or I'm not sorry, community groups, that certain demographics in our community have with the police. I think particularly we saw that with our homeless, with youth, actually a little bit with seniors, although we didn't focus on that demographic, and with some members of the non-English speaking population, particularly those of the Latinx, that are Latinx. So we did notice that there were a lot of comments that we thought would lead, that do lead to follow-up work. And we didn't go into what that follow-up work could look like. But one of the things that we thought is that there needs to be an ongoing community driven dialogue with these different groups with the police. We purposefully did not involve the police in our forums because we wanted people to be able to speak without concern of repercussion, without any kind of fear of being listened to by people they didn't want to hear the stories directly and be identified with. But we do think that the time has come for some of these specific groups to start having opportunity to meet with the police, talk about their experiences on an ongoing basis. So not just a one-time thing like we did, but on an ongoing basis, and to gather feedback. And we do think that what we did with forums, which hopefully in the future could be done in person, but also could be done online, and also collecting survey data online would be an interesting thing to do going forward. Let me see. We heard a lot. And remember, we weren't trying to make recommendations, but we were hearing people's recommendations that they were giving us. We heard over and over people's requests for specific training on topics, and they were wide-ranging, such as violence de-escalation, implicit bias, cross-cultural communications, not just linguistic, but cultural, and just in general, better community relations, like how can officers best present themselves to the public. We even heard that people actually wanted to get more information about how to work with the police, like how do I find the police? When do I know it's an appropriate time to call? Which led to an interesting, something we had identified, that we think that there is also an opportunity for the police to hold workshops around when to know when to call the police. We uncovered some interesting things where people say, well, I have been told that if I see someone I don't know in my neighborhood, I should call the police. Or if I see someone that doesn't look like me, I should call the police. So we think that there's actually a huge opportunity for education of residents of the city as well. And we did hear quite a few requests, big subject category, for better accountability around police behavior. Better incident reporting if people report incidents with the police, better ways to report and follow up on incidences people have had with the police, much more public disclosure and much more community involvement in reviewing data around police incidents. Those were things that we heard that sort of jumped out and also seemed to lead towards or lend itself towards recommendations. I know my colleagues both have thoughts on this matter too.
Julie, would
I'm
you like
happy to
ahead?
go. Yeah, I'm happy to go last.
Okay, go ahead, Julie.
Okay, thank you. Ida Rose, thank you so much for that very comprehensive summary. I'm thinking about what to add. I would like to make one point that for the purposes of our last forum, I will say we, but really Audrey took the lead on developing some scenarios based on our actual stories. So they are not the exact stories themselves. We wanted to make sure that they would be anonymized. So some details were changed. But there are a number of those scenarios that were discussed in the last forum, which was in November. And we do have also actually from our discussion directly with the police department, a couple of other scenarios as well that are anonymized. And I just wanted to point out that we do have those specific scenarios that I think might be useful examples of the kinds of scenarios that it might be helpful for the police department to offer training around. So how to handle those specific situations that have arisen in the community. So I wanted the group to know that we do have those available. Let's see. In addition to that, I know that there is, I believe, if I understand correctly, there is some ongoing discussion on the PSAB about how police respond to people who are living with mental illness or who have developmental disabilities. And I think that is definitely an area for further discussion. Given the stories that we heard that ranged from fear of, for example, fear of calling the police because an escalation might take place involving someone living with mental illness or with a developmental disability. And similarly, the kinds of concerns around SROs. And another point, I think the final point that I'll make builds on something that Ida Rose said about the importance of additional training, not only for the police, but really education for the community. And we did have, it was on one of the slides that Audrey showed, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, we had 8 examples of stories where folks were actually reporting that there was a police response that seemed to involve some bias, but it was really coming from a community bias. So, gee, there's somebody walking down the sidewalk who doesn't look like me or my neighbors. I better call the police. And the police, upon receiving a call that someone is fearful or that there might be some crime that is about to happen or potentially in progress, do respond. And that it's appropriate that the police would take the call and go out to the scene. But that the source of the issue is something that really could be addressed at a community level in addition to at a police level. So those are my additional comments for the moment. Thank you.
Annette, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, thanks. I want to echo a lot of what my fellow commissioners said, and there isn't really that much for me to add, but just to highlight, I think I liked this Ida Rose's suggestion of having an ongoing community dialogue with the police. I thought that a really helpful exercise for us to do with these stories was to be able to share these stories of individual experience with the community at large, as well as with the police department, who I think were pretty receptive. And I just want to underscore again, both Julie and Ida Rose mentioned that it's not just the police department, but it's also community members, and knowing when it's appropriate to call the police and when it's appropriate to maybe take another course of action. Because a lot of times we would hear stories from individuals who would talk about how they were doing something not like pretty innocuous, but getting the police called on them maybe because they look different, or they just, for whatever reason, didn't seem to the community that they belonged. And so it's more of a community level piece of work, as opposed to, or maybe it's a piece of work that needs to be done between the police and the community in that sense. Something that I don't think was mentioned, I might be mistaken because of technical difficulties, it was difficult for me to engage earlier, but I just wanted to mention, in terms of demographics, I think that certain communities, especially communities of color, demographically might not be highly represented in the Mountain View residential community. That is to say, like, there aren't that many residents, we didn't have, I'm sorry, I'll just be a little bit more frank. We didn't have, unfortunately, as many participants who were Black be able to participate in our activities, and I find that to be unfortunate, because I think that the Black community in Mountain View is very important. And there's some mention that demographically, out of Mountain View residents, there are not that many Black residents, which might be true, but also we do have people who are Black, who are members of the community, who might not reside here, but perhaps work here or come shopping here or go to church here. And in that sense, do interact with the general community here. And, you know, I say this, and it also applies to, you know, people of color, communities of color, and communities with disabilities who also don't reside here, but might participate or want to participate in the Mountain View community. And I think that because there is overlap with, you know, the general community here and the police as well, that there should be some, you know, there should be some visibility for those folks as well. And that's it. Sorry, you can't see me, so but that I am done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may, I actually forgot one point I'd love to make.
Please go ahead.
One of the things we also heard, and I think this is something that's really interesting to reckon with, who is the appropriate personnel to go out in different situations was mentioned to us by multiple people. Because you have people, you know, involving the cops and everything from a barking dog to an attempted murder to worse, right? So I think that there's a lot of questioning in the community. You know, do officers belong in schools? Do they belong on mental health calls? Do they belong in domestic violence, in potential domestic violence situations? And if so, when? You know, what sort of use of force or use of bravado is needed on a basic traffic stop or, you know, to write a simple ticket? So I think that there's a lot of concern that in the community as a whole, that policing often is done at this sort of, you know, guns blazing level. And, you know, but what is the actual most appropriate response in a given circumstance was something we heard people mention a lot. And actually a second point I'd like to make is I don't want to discount all of the positive thoughts that we got from the community. I think it's worth digging into why people made positive comments, what made them say positive things about Mountain View Police, and really dig in on that in the future to understand what good policing means to the community of Mountain View. And you'll see topics like, I feel safe, I feel secure in my neighborhood, I feel like nothing bad is going to happen. You hear a lot of personal security and safety issues, and it'd be interesting to dive into that, to what that really means to everyone in our community. And the demographics of people who said things that were positive. We heard a lot of positive comments from the Mandarin community, also from seniors, but we heard them from every age and every color as well. We heard from a wide range of people who had some positive experiences. I think it would be really, really interesting to actually spend more time unpacking that too. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Member Langton, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I kind of looked at the HRC's like work plan, and I don't really see this particular form on there. Is this something that was like assigned to from the city council? Is it something that's been ongoing? Do you expect to do it more? You know, like circle back and kind of every 6 months try one of these things? And do you think there'll be like action based on your survey? And I think it is great to highlight the good things, because it did look a little lopsided with the negative.
I'll take that question. Thank you. This was an assignment from the Council/Race Equity and Inclusion Subcommittee. It was completed in the last fiscal year, and it is that the next work plan for fiscal year 21-22 will go to the City Council for approval in September, and it's got the HRC working on a whole nother set of important issues, but not continuing forward on this front, really kind of passing the baton to the Public Safety Advisory Board.
Great.
Thank you. Member Sandhu, I do want to recognize that you joined us at 7:20. We all got caught up in this topic, so I do want to recognize that. And please go ahead with your comment or question.
Thank you, thank you. I actually put down here, I got here at 7:25. You are better than me in timing. So, thank you, members of the HRC. You guys soft spot in my heart because first day I was going to join it, they were going to cancel it. This is back in 2003. But my question is Commissioner Ida Rose mentioned about the domestic violence, right? During our time, I made sure to get the FBI involved to reach out to the minority community where a lot of domestic violence goes unreported. And one thing we noticed over that time was when you reach out to especially the Latino community, hardly anybody shows up. How did you, since then you have Zoom and all that stuff, obviously last year and a half you've not been able to have any audience or be doing live sessions. Have you guys overcome that? Do you still face the same problem? Because the communication with them was a bit difficult for the our subcommittee with Jeanette and Eva. We're working with Nancy so we can have an outreach with the Latino community, and we're going to try to do outreach with other sections of our great Mountain View community. So have you guys overcome that, or is this still prevalent? Thank you.
I can speak to that, and that the city's wonderful multi-community engagement program, formerly Multilingual Community Outreach Program, or MCOP, works to improve our ability to successfully reach our Spanish-speaking residents, and has developed tremendous networks through the Spanish Language Leadership Academy and its set of graduates who have continued to stay involved through the ambassador program, and how they then become kind of tendrils out into the community in ways to share information in both directions. And we heavily engaged Nancy's assistance in our ongoing planning meetings around who were the community organizations and leaders that we wanted to connect with, to invite them to participate in the listening forums. We had pretty good attendance at our Spanish language forum. But I do know that that topic was not an easy one to engage people with. There was a lot of discomfort in trying to picture, themselves being part of those conversations. And also what we hear from Nancy is, at that time in particular, but in general, people's time is so precious, and they are working so hard to support their families and to address different issues that they really kind of prioritize and don't always make themselves, don't always find that they're able to make themselves available for these kinds of efforts. But I'm assuming that you, through Melvin, are able to connect into the city's experience and expertise through our multi-community engagement program.
Thank you. Julie, you wanted to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add to what Audrey said. I think in my own experience, working with the Latinx community in Mountain View, and I think this would apply to other communities as well, as Audrey mentioned, really working through the community leaders, and also being willing and available to meet people where they are physically and technologically. And that can mean doing having some one-on-one conversations. And I think, that was something we had a number of one-on-one conversations to collect stories about people's experiences with the police that folks, either for technology reasons or other fears, were not willing to participate in a forum, but they were willing to talk, wearing masks, standing outside 6 feet apart, to talk one-on-one or to have a phone conversation, especially if a trusted community leader made that connection and, got that phone conversation set up. And I think also with the help of the, Audrey, am I getting the name right? I keep calling it the MCOP, the Multi-Community Engagement Program. Is that right?
Multicultural. Engagement Program.
Multicultural Community Engagement Program. Thank you. With their help in reaching out to different language groups is just so important, because a lot of people are willing to speak in their native language, but do not feel comfortable trying to address these difficult topics in a language that's not very familiar to them. So in our work, we did have, as a subcommittee on the HRC, the benefit of ourselves being able to reach out directly in a couple of different languages. And so I think that if those on the PSAB, if you are able to do that, and or to work through the multicultural community engagement program, that the addressing the language barrier will be really important as well. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm looking around because I do have a question, but I'm trying to see if anyone else has a question. Okay, I'll go ahead and ask mine then. Audrey, you mentioned that as one of the actions was actually discussing the report findings with command staff. I was wondering if any specific actions came out of that, or recommendations or next steps.
I'll ask Captain Canfield to speak to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Audrey. Chair, the short answer is yes, many actions. Really starting with just sharing those stories and experiences with our line level officers and school resource officers. So our chief and command staff members, having met with the subcommittee, brought that information to our people here. So they heard those stories and that important message. Moving forward and taking real action, the chief began and had created a Latino Community Advisory Council that meets with him and provides him with information and insight, and really helps develop and maintain a strong dialogue about issues and content, both that was presented in the subcommittee or to the subcommittee, and current and new things that are happening. In addition to that, we've made sure that we reach out and start engaging in a greater way with a couple of other Latino and Latinx community groups, Cafecito and El Cafecito, which has been very valuable for us to engage at a deeper level. And I know that there's a lot, so I could keep going, but some of the future things that we have working now, we're creating a faith-based leaders, a similar advisory council to the chief, so they can share information back and forth and really bridge, perhaps for people who don't feel comfortable coming directly to the police department and some of these other formats, and really feel that faith-based opportunities are more welcoming for them to provide information back and forth and foster further dialogue, as well as revisiting kind of a classic community neighborhood meeting association format that we've done in the past, but not only sharing kind of current crime trends and things the police department is doing, but using that opportunity to connect with neighborhood associations and explain when and how to report suspicious activity, what the best methodology for that is, and what suspicious really looks like, and what we want our community to, how we want them to view and look at behavior versus, perhaps phenotypes for suspicion.
Sounds great. Thank you. I had one other question and it's flown out of my head. To follow up on Julie's offer of making the scenarios, which are loosely based on the actual stories you got, but respect the anonymity of the storyteller. Whatever the best way to get that and make that available to members of PSAB would be wonderful. Thank you.
Happy to do that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from PSAB members before I open it up to fasten your seatbelts? Okay, let me go to that. So would any members of the public like to make comments on this item? I will be going in and checking for hands raised now. Mr. McKenzie, go ahead.
Hi all. I just want to thank the HRC for doing all this work. I was one of the participants in the English language session and at the report out. It was amazing work. Thank you very much for bringing the community together like that. I felt like kind of was not really given its real due when it was presented at City Council. So I'm glad that this board has the opportunity to really engage with some of the material. And I just one story that really stuck out with me as a resident was in the report out session in a small breakout group. There was a Black man who lives in Mountain View who said that sometimes there's a hiking path or something like that sort of near his neighborhood, near his house, and sometimes the police park near there, and he is worried about walking at dusk because he doesn't want to put the officer in a situation where he might get profiled, and just is nervous about walking around in the community. That really sort of made me ashamed to be from Mountain View. And I do want to echo also the points that were mentioned about the possibility for community outreach and education. I've also heard some things from community members that was really pretty troubling. And I know that some police officers that I've spoken with have felt similarly about it. And I don't like being called out when there is someone from the community that has bias. So that opportunity for education is definitely something that I'm glad you have the opportunity to pursue as this board. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public that would like to comment on this item? I don't see any hands raised at this point. So I will go back and check in with the PSAB members one last time. Do you have any further questions for staff or comments on this particular topic before we move on to the next item?
Oh, excuse me. I think there is a community member with a hand raised now. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you for pointing that out. Janine Valdez, I apologize. I didn't see your hand before.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to make 2 comments in the form of questions. I understand from public comments you probably can't answer them, so they become food for thought. The first one has to do with the fact that in the area expressions of satisfaction, there were 3 mentions of positive school environment with the SRO, and there was a comment made in the dialogue that those were all 3 from parents. In my experience with outreach, we have found that students often don't tell their parents about negative interactions with PD or SROs on campus. And so I wondered if any part of the survey or outreach specifically targeted students, and if so, did they not give any feedback, or if they were not, it might be something for future study, because that perspective is very different from what adults see in terms of interactions with SROs. Most parental interactions about SROs are through second or third hand, or just a general kind of belief that they have that police presence on campus is a good thing, and therefore their child must benefit from it. So that's my first comment. My second comment, also in the form of a question, is that in Mr. Michael Canfield's response to a latter question about what the PD has been doing, he highlighted several Latinx groups and that they're doing outreach with them and doing some ongoing work. At least the ones that he mentioned, these groups tend to be frank, they tend to be quite conservative in the Latinx community, particularly the faith-based leaderships and Cafecito, and there may be others. He did not mention any more progressive types of organizations. So I would wonder if such outreach is also happening by the PD or by the HRC to those types of groups, whether they're formal or informal, because I think that lens is a distinctly different lens through which to evaluate community relations than with more conservative Hispanic types of organizations, whether formal or informal. Thank you. That concludes my comments.
Thank you. Let me go and check one last time. Oh, and of course, we now have more public attendees. Okay, y'all need to get your hands up on time next time, okay? Mr. England, please keep your comments to the point, because I would like to get back to the PSAB comments.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just a general comment that this is all really good material, and I did follow the HRC process when that was going on. And the important part as far as PSAB is concerned is taking that material and making use of it. And that's what I would like to hear during your deliberations. Thank you.
Okay. There are really no other public commenters at this time, and we're closed on that. I will go back to PSAB right now to see if there's any other comments or questions for Audrey and team and the HRC team before we move on. Joan, are you raising your hand? Okay, please go ahead.
I just want to make a comment on a comment. I would question Janine Valadez's characterization of Cafecito as conservative. I think what she means is religious based, and it really isn't, in my experience. So I want to just put that out, that there's more than one way to look at the way people see things, and I don't see Cafecito as anything but liberal. End of story.
Thank you. Anyone else who has any closing comments on this topic? I just want to add that I heard Ms. Valadez talking about conservative versus progressive, and I'm sure that she would feel comfortable reaching out to Melvin and providing a list of organizations she feels are progressive, so we can kind of compare lists on who we're going after. So Melvin, please pass that on once you hear from Ms. Valadez. Okay, so with that, I am considering this item 5.1, the new 5.1 closed, and we're going to move on to 5.2, which is the School Resource Officer Subcommittee update. So if you all remember at the last meeting, a subcommittee was appointed to explore school resource officers. So this item is an opportunity for the SRO subcommittee to provide an oral update on their efforts so far, for other PSAB members to provide input. We will also, after the SRO subcommittee update, as part of this topic, just checking in to see if anyone has any questions on the MOU, which was provided as part of the agenda. I will be asking for any feedback for folks who went to Dreams and Futures, and Mike and Mr. Canfield and Mr. Gaines will be also addressing some of the questions that were raised at the previous meeting. Okay, so with that, I will open it up to Member Wang. I believe you have an oral update on behalf of the subcommittee. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so the SRO subcommittee has been working mainly on setting up outreach opportunities that are going to be happening once the school year starts. The school year starts on August 11th, and then we'll go from there. So mainly we've been working on creating outreach questions, which will be kind of proposed to the community through surveys and interviews and kind of like discussion sessions. Some of the general questions, just like the general themes of the questions we're asking, include like, what do you think the purpose of having SROs on campus is? Kind of asking about the interactions. And then we have more specific questions for the groups of people that we are going to get experiences from. And the four groups that we're mainly focusing on are students, administrators, educators, and parents. So they each kind of have a slightly different set of questions, so we can get a wide range of opinions. And we've been working with the city's multicultural engagement program, like as it was mentioned earlier, and we're working with them through their ambassador program to reach out to the Spanish-speaking community and mainly Spanish-speaking parents. So kind of like a general timeline, we would like to finalize the questions by the end of this month, which I think is next Saturday. And then we'll do our data collection in August and finish that by September. And that means rolling out the surveys, doing the interviews. And then we will kind of analyze the data and come up with suggestions in November. And we hope to have a recommendation by November, which I think is what the city council was looking for. Some things we've been looking into are just kind of working with other people to, make sure that we're asking the right questions. And we'll reach out to, once we start rolling out these surveys, we'll reach out to, prominent student groups, especially those of student groups of color. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Would other members of the subcommittee like to add on to that? Member Sandhu, Member Tang, is there anything else before we open it up to questions from the broader group? Member Sandhu, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to add that we, as a group, I think I'm going to give kudos both to members Tang and Wang for working really well with Mr. Gaines and myself to get the numbers, the questions done. We had a long list and we're trying to narrow it down so it doesn't overburden any person who has to answer the questions. And likewise, I'm trying to, along with them, reach out not to just a few groups, but even to students in their school with once school starts, so we can get a better sampling. Because knowing students, I think we were all there once. Sometimes you get a survey, you have it, but you never send it back. So this way we can get first-hand information as to the experiences that students, and at the same time, hopefully, time permitting at schools after a year and a half craziness, if we can get the educators, a few of them, lunchtime, and just talk to them about their interaction with the SROs, and perhaps also try to interview the, which was, remember Tang's idea, which I really liked, interview the principals themselves. So we get as much information as possible, so that when we all get together, we know what exactly we are doing and get the proper data, and not just really the meat of what we are looking for, not just little surrounding stuff, a little tidbit here, a little tidbit there. So that's all I have to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Tang, anything at this point to add? Okay. So I would like to open it up, excuse me, to PSAB members at this point to ask any questions, make any comments about the subcommittee's work to date and plan. I'm sorry, Member Wang, you may have had your hand up. Did you have something to add before I open it up?
Yes, Board Member Sandhu's comment kind of reminded me of some stuff that's pretty important. So kind of the methods that we're looking to reach out to people are right now is kind of, especially for the students, through the schools. So that way we can reach as many people as possible. And also we're mainly focusing most of our, especially like, opinion and data collection efforts on the high schoolers and some middle schoolers, but mostly high schoolers on SROs on campuses and for home visits. Because we want to make sure that we don't like traumatize middle schoolers. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let me open it up to PSAB members now for any questions or comments for the subcommittee. Okay, I'll start. I wanted to check the timeline. So Member Wang, what I heard you say was data collection in August. You're finalizing kind of your questions by end of month, and then data collection begins. You're trying to finalize the data collection by end of August. So really August is all about outreach. And there were a couple more steps to reach to the recommendation by November. So I want to check back in with Mr. Gaines on the when is the city council expecting something from us? And how does that timeline fit in with this body then discussing the recommendations and preparing what we want finally to go to council? I just want to be clear on that timeline.
Yes, thank you. So at the start of data collection begins in August, and this body is able to summarize that data and have any other considerations outside of the community engagement aspect. If you guys wanted to have other considerations evaluating the SRO program, we could wrap all of that up ideally by the end of August and September.
Okay.
Meaning in October, we could meet and discuss this again and likely be gearing up to make a recommendation to the city council in November at the latest. Ideally, if we could have a recommendation at the end of October, we meet the fourth Thursday traditionally. If a recommendation is made at that October meeting, then council would have November and December to decide when to discuss their what they'd like to do. When council initially provided direction about the Public Safety Advisory Board taking on this issue, they just set a kind of a deadline or a desire to discuss it this calendar year. So
Okay.
ideally, having something prepared by November would be ideal because.
Okay. And when you say having something prepared, that's coming from the overall PSAP body.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So the any recommendations that come from this body will be from the majority of you, so not just the subcommittee.
Got it.
Which needs to be made to council.
Okay. Okay, so we know what we might be talking about it at our October meeting, it sounds like. So, okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying that timeline. I'm looking around for other hands. I don't see anything, so I will keep going. I wanted to. Oh,
You have a hand from Member Langton.
Member Langton. Oh, you know, I apologize. It's really hard to see these little hands on my screen. I don't mean to overlook you, Member Langton. Please go ahead.
I would never feel overlooked by you. I just want to express my support. It sounds like you guys are doing a really deep dive and you're trying to be very objective and taking the time to get the right questions. Targeting the principal, I think, was a great idea. And hopefully when you're able to get like kind of a broad sample when you interview the students.
Thank you. Okay, really. Member Sandhu, go ahead.
Just to echo Member Langton, what you said regarding the principal, we talked about it for a little while in the sense that if we just send them the survey, people of authority, they are busy. Principals are very busy coming out of this crazy year and a half. So we fear that they might just hand it to some subordinate and say, fill this up and send it back. So that's why we want to get meet the principals and get it from them what their actual feeling is. So not rely on any chance that a subordinate is feeling it. So just to let you know about that. Thank you.
So, so it sounds like you will be covering both middle schools, Mountain View High, as well as Alta Vista. Is that correct?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think right now we're mainly focusing on Mountain View High School and Alta Vista, especially for the student surveys.
Okay, so you had mentioned some middle school students. How will you find those students?
I think that's kind of still under consideration, but I think we might mostly focus on.
If I could interject, and
Yeah, please.
you three subcommittee members correct me if I'm wrong. I understood the intent was to do outreach to the middle schools as well and high schools, not only the high schools. In addition to outreach directly through the schools, we also intend to engage the city's youth advisory committee, which includes middle and high schoolers.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I wanted to mention a group that had come up to my attention. I had a meeting with the school board member last week, and he mentioned a group, the Latino Parents Group, which is a group at Mountain View High. And you may already be familiar. I just wanted to mention them as folks that you could potentially reach out to. You're already aware of them as an organization?
I like read a news article about them yesterday, so I was gonna mention it. Yeah, but we'll definitely.
What I can do is pass on the contact information. I was given permission to contact them by the school board member. They were fine with that. So if it's okay with you, I will pass on the information to Melvin and you can go forward with that.
Awesome. Thank you.
I also want to mention that we do have, as Mr. Canfield mentioned, Captain Canfield, sorry, oh, these police titles, I get all confused. I'm sorry. Captain Canfield mentioned there is a Latino Community Advisory Council. If there is anything, the next meeting, I believe, will be September 30th. We're still trying to figure that out. If there's anything that you would like to discuss there that might help you in your outreach, I know you're trying to wrap up in August, but if there's anything that you'd like to do in September, please keep that date in mind as available to you for if you feel like you'd like to explore anything further with that segment of the community. And I'm still the only one talking. Let's see, looking for hands here. Okay, I do not see any hands. If I do not see your hand, go like this and I make sure I see your hands. I do not see any more hands. I am gonna live dangerously and open it up to public comment. So let me go and see who would like to make comments. Okay, and then, okay, let me pause for 1 second. Mr. Daines, keep me honest here. Do we need to talk about the MOU and the questions we have before public comment in this section, or, wow, look at all these hands going up. Oh my gosh, okay, I'm gonna pretend I didn't see that. Before I open to public comment, or can I take each part of these and talk about public comment on each one? What would you recommend?
I would recommend only opening public comment once.
Okay.
Whether you would like to ask questions following public comment, there will be the opportunity for you to deliberate and ask questions following public comment.
Okay.
Or you can ask your questions now. It's really up to you, but I do strongly recommend only an opening public comment once.
Okay, public, you heard the man. We are going to pause. Thank you for all your hands. I see you, Celine, Tim, Bruce, Dana, I see you. We will be right back. First, I want to ask if there are any specific questions on the MOU from PSAP. I mean, my question is, the MOU seems to have expired. So I was wondering what the latest update on that was. Sergeant, I almost called you Sergeant, Captain Canfield or Mr. Gaines. Do you have any input on or insight into that?
Melvin, do you want me to answer this one?
Sure.
And Kavita, if it's easier, Mike is probably easier than any title.
No, I'm so impolite. Okay, Mike.
So MOU, as you mentioned, Chair Ayala, that the MOU has expired, has lapsed, is under review both by the police department, the city attorney's office, and with the school district. And the probable recommendation will be to extend the MOU for another year. However, the concern was not to be presumptuous with the decisions, the recommendations of the PSAB or the decisions of City Council, and therefore to put an amendment in the MOU that is subject to amendment based on, it wouldn't say based on recommendation, I don't think, but subject to amendment, and that amendment would be based on recommendation from City Council. and would certainly take into consideration your concerns. So it is in progress to be revisited. For the most part, it will look the same as it does now. Was my expectation that there's still other eyes that need to look at it, but the real change, if there is change, would come subsequent to City Council and the board's recommendations.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions or comments on the MOU from PSAB? I'm staring intently. Let me see. Member Wang, I see you.
Thank you. As part of the MOU, I'm not sure if I'm reading this correctly, but it's talking about investigation and questioning of students that should be limited to offenses related to, like, basically it was at school. And is that talking about kind of the interactions SROs have regarding these offenses, that they do that at school also, or that they can contact these students anytime? Like regards to the location where they kind of have the interactions. That's kind of confusing, sorry.
That's okay. Member Wayne, would you mind asking me that question one more time?
Yeah, so for part of the MOU, it talks about kind of SRO's jurisdiction of, investigating, questioning students, having that limited to things that happen at school. Does that mean kind of the SRO's interactions with that student regarding these instances should be at school, or that they can take place anywhere?
It doesn't mean that they can only communicate with the students at school, but that it's related to issues related to their behavior and conduct at school.
And is it recommended that the SROs do talk about these issues with the students at school, or outside of school, or does it not matter?
Honestly, that's really going to be, there's a lot of variables in play. So it would depend on what's best for the student, what's best for everybody's safety, how complex what the nature of the concern is. So I think what's most important is that it would be collaborative, and that it would be what's with the best interest of both the student and the community's safety. So other student safety and that student safety.
Other questions, comments on the MOU? Looking. I don't believe there are any. So I'm going to move to the third part of the SRO topic, which was a question list that we put together as part of the last meeting. What I suggest is that we just go through that list and make sure that everyone has answers to those questions that were posed as part of the presentation and the report from the last meeting. And then I promise public, we will open it up to public comment. So Mike, are you in a position to start answering questions?
I am. Do you want to pose them to me kind of in turn, and then I'll reply?
As an interrogation? Absolutely. I would be happy to practice my police skills. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, here we go. And let's go through this. Okay, so the first one I think is answered, which is the MOU between the school district and MVPD public, and where can it be found? It is indeed public, and it was attached to this agenda. So I think that question is answered. Okay, second question. The SROs who presented mentioned that there were arrests on campus. So the question that came up were, what were those arrests for? And what were the demographics of the students that were arrested? I know there were only a handful, but the PSAB membership team was still interested in finding that out.
Absolutely. So going back and looking at our data for 2017, 18, and 19, because those are the best years. Obviously 2020 isn't going to give us much data. Went ahead and pulled all of those cases, and understand that because of the nature of the juvenile justice system and the intent for youth offenders to have a fresh start, A lot of these cases were sealed and I wasn't even able to read them. So there was nothing available for me to review other than a very surface level of information. Having said that, I can provide this information to you. In 2017, we had one on-campus arrest of a juvenile. And just for the record, I separated out adults that were unrelated to the students. So although the school locations may have some more arrests, they're not really pertinent to what we're talking about. And so we had in 2017, one arrest of a Hispanic juvenile student, and that was for a weapons violation. In 2018, we had 3 students who were arrested. One was for a significant sexual assault, and 2 were for domestic violence arrests. One of those students was Hispanic, and 2 were Caucasian or white. In 2019, we had 3 arrests. One was for a burglary, and 2 were for a witness intimidation case. And of those, all 3 were Hispanic.
Captain Canfield, can you clarify, were those juvenile arrests in all cases, or?
So all of them except for that last case. So the witness intimidation case, both of those arrests were associated to the same incident. And one of the suspects was an adult and one of the offenders was a youth offender. So one was a juvenile and one was an adult. But they were students, so I think it's relevant for the PSAB to know that they were students, even though one was 18.
Okay. Joan, did you have a question to clarify here?
Yes, I didn't get all, and there were 3 students and I didn't get the third reason that the third person was.
So for 2019, 2 students were arrested. One was 18, one was 17 for a witness intimidation case. So that was the same offense. And one student was arrested for a burglary.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Member Wang, did you have a clarification or question?
Not really a clarification, kind of just a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. This is kind of connected to the question I asked earlier, but I don't know if you know this because you just found very basic information on these cases, but would there be any reason why it was necessary for the in 2019 for the person arrested for burglary to be arrested on school campus?
I don't know the answer to that because I couldn't read more of the information in the case. So I don't have any of the specifics. I will say that clearly the goal isn't to make a lot of arrests on a school campus. So if there is some type of reason, whether it's an incident that has just occurred and we're made aware of it and it's significant, that might be a reason why, but it's mere speculation because I wasn't able to actually read that case.
And Mike, just again, you may not know the answer. Are the SROs typically the arresting officers? Or would they be?
It's a preference, absolutely, that if there does need to be enforcement work on a school campus, that it's done by a school resource officer. There are certainly our most qualified officers, have the best relationships with the school administration, interact the best and most effectively with our kids on the school campus, offenders and otherwise. So ideally, yes, but ultimately, if our school resource officers aren't available, it doesn't have to be them, but we certainly would like it to be them.
Okay. Member Tang?
Hi, Captain Canfield. Do we have a log of calls for service and like the reason for those calls for service to Mountain View High and Alta Vista High?
There is not a log generated. I can pull the data that we do have and look and see if we have how many calls have been generated at each of the schools. The high schools, Alta Vista, I suppose, and Mountain View, if you would like, or the junior highs, let me know what you like and we can make a request for that.
Okay, that actually goes into my next question. which is how many calls come from schools typically in a school year? And how do you ensure they're calling you for the right reasons and aren't just being quote unquote lazy to deal with things as administrators?
So I think I'm going to answer the last part of that question first, because I think it's really important. Our school administrators aren't lazy at all. And really by bringing in our school resource officers, we are looking for collaborative efforts to find solutions for problems that are happening with our kids in the schools. So sometimes there are problems at home, sometimes it's problems at school or with gang influence or other negative things in their lives. And so the school resource officers are really a collaborative part of that solution process. They're not the only part by any means, and a large part is absolutely the school counselors and administration. So bringing us in isn't to make their life necessarily easier, but it really is about looking for broad solutions to problems that are really require a lot of different faceted approaches. So for the first part, how many calls come from schools in a year? It really varies dramatically. And in talking with our school resource officers, they field many more calls from school administrators and counselors about follow-up about how students are doing, general conversations about updates and things that are working well or areas for improvement in some of the students that they're collaborating with. And those aren't necessarily, they're calls about the students, but they're not calls for service to come in and do something. And calls to come to a campus really vary. And they vary based on kind of activity that's going on and the culture of the campus and different variables. And sometimes there can be nothing for weeks. And then other times there can be a flurry of, sometimes related and sometimes not incidents. The average based on our school resource officers' experience is about 5 or 6 a month.
Thank you. Okay, and so if Member Tang is asking for some sort of log, and you can pull those calls, let's revisit that maybe as an action item for later then. Okay, the next question from the last meeting is, how is SRO performance measured? And how is that related to generally how performance of police officers are measured? Is it different for SROs or similar for police officers to police officers as a whole?
A little bit of both. Some of the criteria is the same. However, the jobs are so different that if we look at initiative or engagement, community activity, investigative ability, those things really vary. Those are all the same metrics that are measured or documented for a patrol officer, just like they are for a school resource officer, but they mean very different things. So our school resource officers receive an annual evaluation on their performance. However, when we talk about the investigative ability of a school resource officer, it's not the same as, say, a patrol officer. They're investigating really and working with, and communication skills are expected to be different. And although the numerical value is the same in the grading, the expectations are substantively different. As far as evaluation of the program, although we have not heretofore had a numerical success kind of metric for the SRO program as a whole, it is something that's been discussed now in the subcommittee, as well as I believe in the committee as a whole. But we do have a satisfaction survey that we send out to our Dreams and Futures students. So there is some information about what's worked well in the program, what was really well received by our kids and our students. And then we focus on those items and adjust the things that were less popular to try to find the best, most receptive kind of programs and create the best program for our kids.
Do school administrators also have, or are they requested for formal feedback on SRO performance? I'm using that term a little loosely, but their presence, how is that kind of feedback? Is it officially collected?
It's not officially collected, like asking for a documentation or a form or even a narrative. Certainly we're in close communication with school administrators, and the administrator, the lieutenant for the school resource officer program, has close connections to the school administrators. but we don't solicit specific feedback for officer evaluations as of now.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to pause for a second, see if any hands are raised. No, I don't see anything. Okay, the next question is, what are the yearly goals for the SRO program and how are those goals measured? I think you started to touch on this, but go ahead.
So the goals, we identify a number of programs and classes that we want to teach, work with our schools, classes such as DARE or classes on internet safety, vaping, etc. However, those really do vary based on need. And certainly, as we'll see in the upcoming school year, based on students' time and the ability of the school to provide that. So it's not as simple as to say we want to teach 10 classes, have 80 kids come through Dreams and Futures. It is very much a variable. We certainly set goals such as our DARE program and revisiting and returning to DARE program, but there's a lot of variables at play. So we made sure, for the example of DARE, to send our SROs to training programs, begin the preparation for those courses. So that's certainly a goal. However, there are factors that can't be controlled. So at some point, those classes will be presented, but certainly not being able to present them doesn't mean that they didn't fulfill their mission or goal.
Okay.
But I would say this, the primary goal and function of our school resource officer program and our youth services unit is to provide services, engagement, and partnership with our schools and other community stakeholders for the benefit of our students in the city. So that's kind of like our general focus goal for the unit. And based on what's happening, we have to make assessments and reassessments to what programs, home visits, manners in which we can assist and fulfill that. And it really does vary based on students and years and what's going on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question actually is something I think the subcommittee is already doing, which is how can PSAP members meet students, parents to discuss, understand SRO interactions? I think that's underway for August. Let's see what else. I think that was basically it. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any other questions that PSAP members had from our last meeting. Do you remember the presentation and the report that they would like to ask at this point? Okay, I'm checking. I don't see any hands up. There will be an opportunity for comment after we go to the public. So let me go there and see who still has their hands up. Okay, ladies first. Dana, go ahead.
Oh, wow. Thanks. What an honor. Two things I wanted to raise. One was I appreciate the consideration about this survey, designing the questions, making a plan for really thoughtful and thorough outreach. And I'd like for this group, whether it's the subcommittee or the group at large, to set expectations in advance regarding how you plan to interpret the results, because it seems like an opportunity for a missed opportunity to just ask all the questions and then interpret them in different ways. And so I'd like this group to make certain guidelines or perspectives, a protocol in advance for how you plan to interpret the results fairly. And one thing in specific that I'd like you to make sure to continue to prioritize is centering the perspectives of those who've actually had the experiences and the interactions with SROs. For example, parents or adults or folks who are less removed or more removed from the situation may not have as accurate of information. I think it's just a general good practice to center the experiences of folks who are closest to the program. Another thing I wanted to mention is I think you'll hear, and we've heard a lot from the community asking the question about, of course, this work is important. We want students to access services. Why is it that it is most important for these services to be coming from sworn officers? And I think that question is going to get asked a lot, but one thing I looked at was the numbers behind it. And so I looked at the memo provided to PSAB on June 24th from Captain Canfield, Mr. Gaines, and Ms. Seymour Ramberg. And this is all in your emails from June 24th. And it includes the budget for the Youth Services Unit, about $1.3 million most of which 1.25 or so is the budget for 4 officers. So the YSU sergeant at $350,000 and 3 SROs at $300,000 each. So over $1.2 million for 4 adults. I also looked at the MVLA salary schedule for classified therapists. I couldn't find counselors, psychologists, or social workers, but I did find therapists, and their range is from $99,000 to $120,000. So what that means is, for the cost being paid for 4 officers to do this work, that same cost could afford for 10 to 12 full-time positions at the rate of a therapist. We totally agree that people need these services. Students deserve to access adults and mentors who care for them and can check on them. And my question is whether it is so critically important that these providers have a badge and a gun that we're willing to hire only 1/3 as many adults in full-time positions when compared to the number of positions that we could be supporting students with if these positions were being filled by civilians. Now, I know it's not as simple as taking money from one and putting it in the other. I know there's a lot of complications between the city budget and the school district budget. So I know I'm oversimplifying things a little bit, but at the end of the day, we have to ask whether it's 3 times as important for an officer to be doing this work compared to how many adults and how many hours of services we could be providing to students if it wasn't coming from the police department as a starting point. So I'd love for you to please consider alternatives to the program as you go, rather than operating from a default that this work has to be done by officers in the first place. And yeah, I wasn't aware of time because I didn't know how many minutes I had, and I forgot to start my own timer. So I'm done now, but you might want to consider formalizing the timer, showing the timer for the next couple of folks. So thank you all so much.
Okay. Well, guess what? We already listened to you, Dana, and everybody's got 3 minutes. Yay. So Radhika Kamran, you are up next.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I couldn't see the unmute button. I'd like to ditto everything that Ms. Petey just said, and I had a question about what the SRO's purpose is other than, like Ms. Petey said. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Can you come back to me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Mr. Demergy, please go ahead.
Hi, yeah. I'm Salim. I work in Mountain View, but I grew up in Los Altos. So I followed the Los Altos Police Task Force when they were doing something similar, surveying high school students at LAHS about the SRO program. And I wanted to tell you some things that we learned in that process that might help with some expectations. So one is you should be prepared for a scenario where you get a small sample size. Los Altos got 28 responses. And the responses involved self-selection, so you get strong feelings in both directions. And then second, only a small sliver of the people who responded had ever interacted with SROs. 90% of them never had. And only 3 people did. 2 of them had a negative experience. 1 of them had a neutral experience. It really are, these are small numbers. Third, of the people who haven't interacted with SROs, very few of them know what they do. There are people on both sides of the aisle who, like think that police officers are just loitering around to like arrest people and like search their bags, which that's not what SROs are doing primarily. And then there are other people on the other side of the aisle who think that SROs are just there to, wait for a school shooting to happen so they can jump into action, which also is not what happens. And you should be aware of that ahead of time. You might want to ask, do you want to weigh those opinions equally if they don't understand the program? And then the fourth thing is, I agree with Dana. When you have a survey like this, you really want to know ahead of time what you're looking for, because otherwise you can just read whatever you wanted to find into the data. So, if someone doesn't know what the SRO does, do you take their opinion into an account? If they've never interacted with an SRO, do you take their opinion into equal account as people who have? And then the fifth thing I would say is that one of the few things that actually was clear in the survey that we sent out was that the majority of people agree with the goals of the SRO program, but very few people I mean, only one person was confident that the SRO achieved those goals out of 28. So I thought that was like a stark finding. And I don't know if I have enough time. No, I don't. I have 10 seconds. Okay. Well, in that case, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Oh, wait, then I'll keep going. Okay. Thank you. So one other thing I wanted to talk about was the feedback you'll get from the school administrators. My read on this is that the school district appreciates having a free resource, the SRO, that they don't have to pay for, who can deal with their toughest cases. And there's also no liability for them because they entrusted the student with, another authority figure. But they don't have data on whether the program works. They don't have metrics to judge whether it works. And when they spoke to Los Altos, they disagreed on the goals compared to the police department. And I think what should happen is that you should have an MOU that stringently defines when police are allowed to help, and then also have a social worker replace that role for lesser issues, like less serious.
Okay, thank you for that. Bruce, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I want to echo what Dana said about the numbers, but I also want to bring back the question that I asked earlier, which I don't think we have the answer to so far, or at least I missed it, it was said, about overtime and the SRO officers, because my understanding is that the SRO officers actually do police work as well, and so they could receive overtime. And I'm not sure how that works given the budget that's established through the city. So that question stands. And then my own background, when I went to school, we did not have police officers on campus. I mean, they came to campus if there was some kind of a problem, and it was very rare. And everybody knew the police are here, it got around campus really fast. So it seems odd to me to even have such a program at all. But my questions are, my concerns are, or my requests are that you put your most attention on exploring alternatives to the current SRO program, not just assume that this would be handled the way it is through MVPD. And regardless of whether people like or dislike the program, it needs to be effective and it needs to be cost effective too. And I think it's worth exploring why other cities have eliminated or considered eliminating their SRO programs. I know that's a little contentious because we don't think that all cities are the same, but that kind of comparison is worth doing. We shouldn't reinvent the wheel and just pretend that Mountain View is somehow different or special in some particular way. Thank you.
Tim McKenzie, go ahead.
I want to thank you, Chair IR, for pointing out that the MOU has expired. That was a question that I had as a member of the public. And I understand the gears of bureaucracy turn slowly, but it was surprising to me that something that has had so much public interest for so long sort of just has gone unnoticed and is going to be extended without possibility for public comment, but other than now that you capable members of the board are turning your attention to it. I also want to raise the fact that Mountain View is a place with multiple school districts. There isn't any info on the Wisman School District MOU. That maybe that one has lapsed as well. That's something that I'd be curious of knowing about. And I think board member Wang's question earlier was excellent of the arrests on campus. Did they have to actually occur on campus? And just echoing what I think everyone else has said of everyone agrees that the services for the kids are excellent and should be provided. It's the marginal and opportunity costs of, are the police the best people to provide them? They've picked up the slack because everything falls to the police in the way that we have structured society, but are they the best people to actually be providing these services? And I think that we shouldn't be looking at like, how can we make the cops and the kids get along better? It should be what do the kids need and how can we best provide that? I think the numbers provided by Dana earlier were really stark. Thank you.
Thank you. Radhika, you in a position to try again?
Hi, yes, I'm so sorry. I'd first like to introduce myself. I'm a student at Mountain View High School, and I would like to say ditto to literally everything that everybody has said so far. And as Mr. McKenzie had just said about the SROs being the best people, I think it's really important to understand, like he said, that everything is fallen onto them. So I think that's another regard that makes them maybe not the best people to handle everything. And then there was something brought up by Captain Canfield earlier. I'm not recalling the exact connotation of this topic, but he mentioned something about gang behavior, and I think the education of certain things that the SROs provide. But it led me to recall a question about how the SROs are providing education and possibly incorrect or prejudiced, ideas that they're spreading to students or even teachers about maybe what things like, gang behaviors look like or mean, leading to like what other people have mentioned about the incorrect calling upon of police, or in this case, SROs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm looking to see if anyone else has their hand raised. And let it be known, I see no one. Okay, so I'm going to go back to PSAB at this point and ask if any members of the PSAB group have questions or clarifications at this point they would like to make. Joan, go ahead.
Thank you. I was struck by the comment of the cost of the of the SROs. I saw that list also. What I remember, and I had a business well over 20 years ago. If I wanted to hire anybody, it cost me twice as much as his salary in other expenses, usually taxes and insurance and a whole lot of extras like that. So my question actually to Mike, I hope you have the answer, were those budgeted costs including overhead and all of the things I'm thinking about, or were they really police salaries?
They were, I don't know if those include, I believe that actually includes even the cost of pencils and paper and everything else, but at a minimum, and probably most importantly for the real numbers, is it covers both salary as well as benefits, health insurance, pension contributions. Those are going to be significantly higher than even the equipment-based needs of the officers.
That's what I thought. I wanted to point that out, and I suspect if you were to hire psychologists, you would have to make at least the same factor before a psychologist could be employed by the school district to do an equivalent or even better job. Am I thinking correctly?
I'll step in. I'm not sure what salary schedule Ms. Petey was pointing out from MVLA, but it's likely that if she was discussing the salary only for that position, it did not include the benefits, et cetera, that would accompany that may take that $90,000 figure up and increase it.
Yeah, I think so. I wanted to point that out. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
So Mike, while we're on the topic of salaries, do SROs get overtime?
SROs are eligible for overtime, just like any of our other employees. The majority of their work is scheduled on what we call straight time, not on overtime, and that involves a significant amount of adjustments if we know there are changes in their schedule coming up. However, being a 24/7, 365 day operation, there are needs of our students in our community that occur off hours when our school resource officers are not in uniform or in plain clothes in the building or working, and they often and regularly respond to these problems. and I hope they're putting in for overtime for their work. I've heard sometimes they don't, but I recommend and they need to be putting in, but a lot of their work is off hours at times, and it does need to be compensated.
Right. And to clarify, they're not doing other patrol duties. It's in and around the youth work is what you're referring to. Is that correct?
They may sign up. Their primary duties are school resource officer duties.
Okay.
They may sign up for overtime or other shifts that are available. However, those cannot conflict and get in the way of school resource officer duties. So the primary mission, objective, and focus is doing school resource officer work. There are other shifts where they're available. However, I'll say if they're working one of those other shifts and there's something that involves a student, a youth, a child, almost certainly, even if it is not at a school, those officers, and even if it's not on their beat or their sector that they're working, they will take those cases and will be the most qualified people for it.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask if there is a Mountain View Wistman School District MOU that could be made available. Mr. Treasurer, Mike?
In review, I have not been able to find one in any of our records for a Mountain View Wistman School District MOU.
Okay, so let's just make a note to follow up on that and confirm that, because perhaps one should exist somewhere. Okay, and then I would just like to encourage Radhika, the member of public who had comments, if you have had direct experience with SROs, I would encourage you to make yourself available during the outreach of the subcommittee. As Dana mentioned, it's important for the study to center on folks who have real lived experience. So if you have had that and are in a position to speak about it, feel free to send your contact information to Mr. Treasurer, and I'll stop that joke soon, I promise, Mr. Treasurer. And we'll make sure to include you as part of our subcommittee outreach. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to say. Anyone else before we close this topic? And clearly we have to close the meeting because it's 9 o'clock. I'm sorry, Member Tang, but you know, I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Member Tang. And we need to see we need to see a better picture of your cuddly friend. Okay.
Oh, he starts crying if I ignore him for too long. Sorry.
I have the same issue here.
I mean, I would love to get a salary and cost comparison of our SROs and I guess other people who may provide similar services. I guess a more accurate one. I mean, because we can only glean so much from the salary schedule of a therapist at MVLA.
If I could, just a clarification, in that comparison, there are components of SRO duties that cannot be fulfilled by a non-sworn person. Criminal investigations, arrests, etc. Would you like us in that comparison to focus only on those responsibilities that could be done by a non-law enforcement sworn officer? Or like, how would you like that comparison to?
I'm thinking specifically about like the outreach and home visits and yeah, stuff that a non-sworn officer could do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think if I were to provide that comparison, I would make clear that that is representative of a percentage of the SRO's work, not it's the entirety of that SRO's work. Okay.
Okay. That sounds good. Member Tang, did that answer your question? Okay, great. Member Langton, go ahead.
Slightly off topic, I'm just curious, is there a plan to move this in person? And when might that happen?
Are you talking about these meetings?
Yeah.
The city of Mountain View is working toward in-person meetings, and we don't have a date as of yet, as we're still figuring out our COVID-19 response and trying to make sure that we can have public meetings, considering every member of the public's vaccination
Not
status,
vaccinated.
all other things. We're a little bit away from going. I imagine that at least through September, November, we'll still be meeting virtually.
Okay, thanks.
Member Tang, I see your hand is still up. I don't know if that's a remnant or if you have no, okay. That's just left over. Okay, anyone else on the SRO topic before we move on? Okay. Mr. Gaines, is there a protocol for like stretch break or bio break? Or do we just power through?
If the PSAB desires, you can just by consensus agree to take a 5-minute, 10-minute, whatever minute break. Not too.
Can I make a motion to take a 5-minute bio/stretch break?
I second it.
Okay. And there's a third and fourth. Okay. So it is 9:07 on my clock. Let's meet back at 9:12. Give yourself 5 minutes. Get hydrated. Oh, the timer's on. Thank you. And we will see you back here in 5 minutes.
Still on off. You're on mute. You're unmuted.
Hi, Eva. How old is that cat?
He is 15 years old this year.
We are still a live meeting, by the way, just
Sorry.
Melvin's not letting me start my video again. This is Kavita.
I apologize. Let me see if I can fix that.
I feel like I have the child lock on.
You do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I also am locked out.
You should be good now. I don't think I turned off anyone else's video.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I think Cal and Derek thought I saw them. They're even there. So, all right. So we are going to move to item 5.3, PSAB fiscal year 2021-22 work plan development. Mr. Gaines will provide a presentation and then I will lead a discussion about the PSAB work plan. Mr. Gaines, Mr. Treasurer, gotta get it one more time. Mr. Gaines, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just setting up my screen share. Okay. So I am going to begin this item about our Public Safety Advisory Board work plan discussion. I will walk you through it, beginning with an overview of the City Council's work plan approval process. So in accordance with City Council Policy A-23, the work item referral process for council advisory bodies for council committees, each City Council advisory body proposes a work plan to the City Council annually. When reviewing proposed work plans, the City Council will consider how the proposed work plan items fit within or address City Council priorities and interests. They will consider staff workload and capacity, particularly right now, due to capacity constraints throughout the city of Mountain View from COVID and the city's continued focus on COVID-19 recovery. The City Council is asking advisory bodies, and they're limiting themselves as well, to limit the number of items on a work plan. Therefore, I am recommending that the Public Safety Advisory Board work plan include no more than 5 items. Considerations for approval also consider the scope of the advisory body. And when we're proposing items on our work plan, the City Council will want them to fit within the advisory body's scope. So tonight, we will work through with this item. I will be asking each of you to identify work plan items, and I'll present a few later in this presentation as well. Following this meeting, staff will assess how proposed items fit into the scope of the PSAB, the workload impacts of the proposed items, and the feasibility of the PSAB undertaking those items during this fiscal year. Based on this assessment, we will present recommendations to the PSAB for an annual work plan, at which point at the August 26th meeting, you all may deliberate and decide which of the recommendations you like. And ultimately, the PSAB proposes the work plan that will be submitted to the City Council. The city council will review the work plans along with every other advisory body work plan in the city of Mountain View in September. The scope of the PSAB is an important consideration for the city council, and I'll just highlight what the scope of the PSAB was. So the PSAB was formed in December. Officially, the city council formed the PSAB December 2020 based on a recommendation from the ad hoc city council subcommittee on race, equity, and inclusion. During that meeting, the city council considered various models of public police oversight, including those where independent professional, like investigators, would conduct investigations of complaints against police. They considered models where professional auditors review and examine police operations and internal investigations. And they also considered models that are similar to what the PSAB is currently operating as, review boards and commissions, which are comprised of non-professional staff, volunteer community members who fulfill a scope of work that is defined by the governing body. In this case, the city council has tasked the Public Safety Advisory Board specifically with serving as a liaison between the public and the city on public safety matters, holding public forums on public safety matters, and providing recommendations to the city council, city manager, and police chief. While public safety is fairly broad and services and operations of the Mountain View Fire Department may be related or are related to public safety, that wasn't necessarily the specific scope or the task of the PSAB. The city council did not desire for the PSAB to look at Mountain View Fire Department operations and to make recommendations to the fire chief. So while it is related to public safety, it's not necessarily under the scope of the PSAB based on the what the PSAB was formed as. So considering potential work plan items, there are a number of ongoing items which you all have heard about at this point that are likely going to be included in your work plan, or what I would recommend to be included in your work plan. This body has already accepted that we are working on the item of reviewing the school resource officer program. So in addition to that, the research fellow, Mr. Alex Stevenson, provided a presentation on his research on traffic stop disparity last month at the PSAB meeting. And based on his research conclusions, which we anticipate will be presented August 26th, the PSAB will likely have follow-up actions that they may take. So that is a likely item that the PSAB may want to add to their work plan. And we also have a number of alternative mental health crises responses that the city is exploring, both internally as well as in partnership with Santa Clara County. And we will present more on these programs at the August 26th meeting. And there will likely be roles for the PSAB to take to provide input and shape how we engage in these programs, as well as to help us to perform any community engagement. So those three items: school resource officer, program review, traffic stop disparity assessment, and alternative responses to mental health crises are three items that this body may want to add. In addition to those, there is room potentially for us as a body to take on additional items. I am proposing today that each of you propose up to 2 items that we could add, and then we'll go through an exercise to kind of prioritize those. With the idea that ultimately we will land on a 5-item maximum work plan. And also just acknowledging that throughout the year, the city council or the city manager's office or the police department may ask the PSAB to work on something else if an issue arises. The recommended process for this is that I'm going to ask each of you to share your top 2 work plan items. While you all are sharing those, myself and Captain Canfield will be documenting each member's items. We will also assist with consolidating items. If people say similar items, we will try to merge them into one. And then ultimately we'll present a list and ask for the PSAB's approval of that list for the staff to assess and bring back some recommendations at the next meeting. Again, next steps are following this meeting, staff will assess how proposed items fit into the scope of the PSAB, the workload impacts of proposed items, and the feasibility of the PSAB undertaking those items during this fiscal year. Based on this assessment, staff will recommend items for the PSAB's consideration at the August 26th meeting, where the PSAB will discuss the recommendations, prioritize as necessary, and identify the limited number of items that have consensus or majority support to include on the proposed work plan to the City Council. And the City Council will consider that work plan in September and go from there and approve it, ideally, possibly with modifications. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Gaines. So you've all heard that staff recommends that each member provide up to 2 new work plan items. Before we do that, I'd like to know if any PSAB members have questions about the presentation or the process. Can we start with that? Member Tang, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Clarifying question, are the items that we are proposing outside of the 3 main items that are like pretty much already on the work plan?
You may propose up to 2 additional. I'm just really asking you to prioritize what you want. If you think that, you know, there are 5 highly important items and you agree that those 3 that I've recommended are 3 of the top 5, you may propose 2 additional ones. Yes, they are in addition to the
Member Tang, we can see eye rolls on camera, just so you know.
Not an eye roll, it's just trying to figure out if I understand or not.
What? Okay, other questions or clarifications for Mr. Gaines at this point? Because then I will open it up to public comment. Okay, I don't see any other hands at this time from PSAB, so I will open it up to public comment. I will, let me check how many people have comments, if my thing would open. So I have 4 people who have comments. Let's go ahead and give everybody 3 minutes. I think we have time for that. Miriam, we have not seen you this evening, so why don't you go ahead and lead us off?
And yet I have been here the whole time, laying in wait now. So I'm personally interested in the mental health item for the work plan. One thing I wanted to mention about that, and it's something that I've really been thinking about a lot since I've been in the MVPDX program, is that the moment of crisis is just one point in a longer story. So the moment of crisis is what we are kind of focusing on because it's the point when a person might come into contact with the police or some other resource. But you know, there's things that happen before that, and there's also support that people need afterwards. And I think that's sort of part of the whole equation. And ideally, with proper support, people, you know, we can minimize the number of crises people have and the need for crisis support. Although I think with mental health, we'll always need some kind of crisis support. So I'm hoping that can sort of be part of the purview, is that there might be programs we can put into place to reduce the number of these crises calls, or supports we can put in place after the crisis call to make sure that people aren't, don't have repeat crises, and that we can, once, we identify that someone needs support, we can support them. And I sort of, my understanding from, talking to folks at the police department in MVPDX is that this is something that I think across the board, that the PD and the community and everyone would be supportive of, is sort of a better wraparound service. So I'm hoping that can be part of the purview of that work plan item, if that work plan item makes it. That's it.
Thank you. Tim McKenzie, please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I'd like to echo what Miriam just said. Sort of a lot. I'd also like to bring up, I believe it was Vice Chair Frink asked a question one time about it seemed like it was illegal or something to have mental health response embedded in the fire department. I may have misunderstood the question, but that feels like it could fit within that existing directive that you already have. And I'd also like to point out that just because something exists a way does not mean it has to. We, as agents of our own reality, can help choose the world that we want to live in. And if things are one way, the board could recommend to city council to do some advocacy or lobbying to change things. I believe council member, board member Brodowski brought up previously the lawsuit. I know that may not be something, the excessive force lawsuit, that may not be something that can be explicitly talked about, but given that it is ongoing, but the procedure of the police department pooling with other cities for insurance in case of bad actors is something that could be investigated by the board. And I'd like to recommend something along those lines. With the report outs from Alex's research, there will be, that's on traffic enforcement, disparities in traffic enforcement. I would like to point out the idea of what happened, I believe, in Berkeley, of non-police officers enforcing traffic that could fit within that existing agenda item. I'd like to plant that seed now. And what came up a lot with the discussion about SROs was, are police officers the best to be providing this service? And I'd hope that we could ask that about all the services that we have, and that could tie in with something that came up from the HRC question of doing education within the community. Of sometimes it was community member bias that was resulting in disparities through no fault of the police. And in that outreach and education to the community, I'd hope that we could actually really assess when is the best time to call the police. When should we be calling armed agents of the state tasked with enforcing laws and keeping the peace? And when can we otherwise try to divert to other resources that exist, and how can we build these resources that, as Miriam was talking about, there's a long chain of events that lead to the point where it comes to police interaction. I hope you'll consider some of these things. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Joan McDonald, please go ahead.
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me now? I would hope that PSAB would not attempt to reinvent the wheel. When you're looking at mental health professionals who can do some of the things that armed officers are doing now, and perhaps not even really well trained for, I would hope that PSAB would reach out to CHAC. This is an almost 50-year-old local organization that has mental health workers in all of the schools and available to the police and available to the community. So don't let that valuable resource go untapped. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Janine, please go ahead.
There we go. I just got the unmute. Thank you. My comment has to do with funding. I would venture to say, and again, I'm not a compensation specialist, that in looking at any employee, there's always associated overhead. And that has been mentioned earlier by one of the members. That's a well-known fact. But I would venture, and perhaps some analysis can be done to show that the overhead associated with the salary and compensation, overall compensation package for an armed officer would be substantially higher percentage than for a licensed mental health counseling or other restorative type of professional. And not without good reason. There's no question that it's like comparing a technical employee in the high-tech industry to perhaps another kind of employee in the non-high-tech industry. The overhead tends to be less. Or a hardware engineer where it may require more overhead than a software engineer. So there is good reason. However, I would still continue to say that given that that percentage is probably higher for a police officer than it would be for a mental health professional, I think the argument still holds that we can look at how best to deploy the human resource that we have in ways that most benefit students. Perhaps it is justified that that valuable and expensive resource of the police officer should be turned more towards other tasks such as investigative work, et cetera. Whereas these more efficient funding towards mental health professionals could help students in a more direct way, both before, during, and after the moments of crisis that were referred to earlier. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's move on. Dana, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for the full 3 minutes, even though it's past 9 p.m. I appreciate everybody staying up late and hearing us out. I never feel overlooked by you all. I first want to express my support for all the items that have been previously mentioned, especially this mental health first response piece. I really want to thank Joan for mentioning the valuable resource that we have in CHAC, and I'd love for the PSAB to think about how to best deploy that resource. I think that's a great point. And I want to thank Miriam for making me think about earlier intervention regarding mental health, because comprehensive mental health care and preventative mental health care really could be seen as a public safety investment. The other thing I wanted to bring up, kind of piggybacking off of what Mr. McKenzie said earlier, was brought up by the HRC commissioners earlier tonight, which was to look into the incident report mechanisms and making sure that we have a transparent and clear oversight process for that. I mean, I'll admit to not being familiar enough about them on their own, but I am familiar with several of the lawsuits regarding officer misconduct that have been discussed or possibly settled in the past several years. And I know that there's confidentiality issues regarding what's sealed and what's public and what could happen behind closed doors, but I do think independent oversight is an important component of that work. And I've heard that mentioned by members of this board in previous meetings. I think it was the first meeting when folks were talking about the things they'd like to see PSAB think about. So I hope that makes it to the work plan, because you know, who's better positioned to do the position of independent oversight than a board called the Public Safety Advisory Board. So that's the last thing I wanted to echo. Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thank you. And last but not least, Bruce, please go ahead.
There we go. It took a while for me to see the unmute button there. Yeah, I have 3 questions related to the staff memo and then 2 requests for the work plan. So on page 1, it talks about fire department not being included in the work that's being done, or at least in the coverage for what the memo was talking about. And I'm not sure I understand why that is. It seemed to me that when the direction came from council, that they talked about all arms of public safety, police, fire, EMS, mental health, and so on. So I was curious about that. And then the part on page 2 about getting referrals from various entities and not through city council, I'm wondering about that because I thought that all referrals came through city council first and then came to the advisory body. And lastly, about mental health crises. It's just that not all crises are mental health, right? So you can have disputes that happen on the street or in people's homes or whatever. Those are not necessarily mental health. And I don't know if you're just, when you say mental health, if you're just speaking more broadly than something that you would consider a mental health crisis. So I'm just curious about that part. As far as the work plan requests, I'm hoping that you will examine public safety in Mountain View beyond just PD. So that, as I was saying before, that would include fire, EMS, mental health, and other crisis response. And also considering combining all public safety services into one public safety department. Some cities have done this, for example, Sunnyvale. Wouldn't have to be just like Sunnyvale's, there are differences, but there can be efficiencies of scale by combining all services into one department. Thank you.
You are muted, Chair Iyer.
And I will channel Tim McKenzie and say it's not a Zoom meeting until someone does that. So yeah. All right. So what I was saying is with public comment over, I'm going to check and see if any PSAB members have further questions now that public comment is closed. And then we can go into the 1 to 2 items that people would like to add for consideration to the work plan. So let me start first with any comments or questions before we go into specifically the 1 to 2 items that people may want to add into consideration. Okay. Then why don't we go into the top 2 work plan items from every member. And we have 3 existing ones, so feel free to give your support to those. And then up to 2 additional ones that you would like to, put out there for consideration. Now, remember, right now we're just collecting. Staff's going to go off and think about it and look at time and the other factors that Mr. Gaines mentioned. But please go ahead and put your suggestions out now. Would anyone like to kick us off? Otherwise, I will just go by the boxes on my screen. Member Sandhu, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to first thank Joan to be on here. She's a good old friend, and we were on check for a long time. And that just happens to be my first thing, how we can consolidate check services, which is, I think, is already in schools, into the program where there's more outreach to prevent problems before they start in schools, especially sticking with schools. They also provide services to the public, free or at no cost at all, or little cost. So that's one of the things I really want in there, in the work plan. See how we can really make it a much better way to deal with problems before they really start, or even if they started, how we can help kids get better or the public better. That's number 1. Number 2 is, this might sound a little strange, knowing budgets and all.
I'm not sure if everybody else, if it's my bandwidth, but I didn't get that at all, Member Sandhu.
I'm sorry. Member Sandhu, your connection is going in and out. It was a little hard to follow. It was something about chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I upgraded my Xfinity to 1 gig, and this is what it's doing. So if you want, somebody else does it. I'm going to come back later if you don't mind.
Okay, that sounds good. Member Brodowski, would you like to take the floor here and with your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. I am in agreement of that we should go ahead with the 3 topics that are already on the table. And I brought up one more last time. So I will propose it formally. The city of Mountain View is facing a lawsuit in the United States District Court. This is a federal lawsuit brought on constitutional grounds, and it's formally called Federal Court 5:21-CV-02651. And it's asking for damages for violating of federal constitutional rights. And the plaintiff is asking for a jury trial. So I think we ought to be examining that and perhaps saying something about it. This is, the plaintiff is charging police brutality, essentially. And it will be a jury trial, and he has to put up evidence, so it'll be interesting. But it's something that's threatening our police, our dear police, and we should be on top of it. So I propose that as one item that we should be looking at.
So Joan, one clarification. Are you talking about this case specifically, or are you talking about some sort of oversight about complaints in general? What is, I want to be really clear on what you're suggesting.
Well, I think we should be both. I think we should be open to complaints in general, but especially in this case, it's a federal case. It's filed, it's a suit, and it's for $10 million. I think we should be, we should know what the police side is. I read the whole 27 pages of the suit, and I don't know what the police would have to say about it. What happened on their side? You know, anybody can write anything in a suit, and it could be true or not. So this is what I think we should be looking at.
Okay. Mr. Gaines, any further clarification needed from Member Brodowski on that?
No clarification needed. Just like a reminder that we are not at liberty to discuss an ongoing case. So we wouldn't be able to discuss the specifics. I've documented your request that it be included on the work plan, and we can provide you with a more formal response to that includes the city attorneys chiming in on it. And we'll present that to you at the August 26th meeting.
Thank you. I would like to know what the basis is for keeping such a thing secret from us, if we are the Public Safety Advisory Board. And I already requested I requested from the city lawyer. I haven't had a response. Okay.
Thank you. I don't see any hands up, so I'm just going to call on folks. Not trying to put you on the spot, I'm just going across the squares on my screen. Member Tang, you knew it was you.
Dang it, the teacher gets cold called. Oh, by the way, Cal, side note, one, you have some strong words for, what is it, Xfinity. I hope you write them a strong worded letter. But you might want to turn your video off when you're sharing, just so the bandwidth only goes to like your audio so we can hear you. But in terms of items, I was particularly interested in the lawsuit brought up by Mr. Joel Alejo, and I know that we can't talk about specific lawsuits, so I would like us to explore what happens in partnership with other police departments and the accountability within when we were working with other departments as well. I'm not sure if I made that very clear. How do we ensure that you know, other departments that we work with you know, are up to the same standards and are they're held to the same accountability that MVPD is. My second proposal is developing Mountain View's mediation program further, because I see that we have a conflict resolution program, which could be more helpful in situations where the police may be called, but it doesn't necessarily need police intervention, such as noise complaints, like the smaller things that police may be called for.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Member Sandhu, back to you. Are you in a position to try again?
Yes, I am. Is this better?
Sounds promising.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, so back to what I was saying, I would like to explore a better working relationship with, actually, a more detailed working relationship with Czech. I want to thank Joan, which I was trying to do, for being here today. She and I were members of the board of Czech a long time ago. Nevertheless, we need to explore that. So it's just for, they have it in every school, if I'm not mistaken. Still, we need to have intervention earlier. So if we can get the SROs recommending kids when they see a problem to the Czech, that'd be good. Likewise, when the police officers see a problem, instead of just probably arresting someone who's slightly have some mental challenges, try to get in check. Obviously, if they're not violent, right? Violent situations are different. That's one. And the second one might sound a little corny, but I'll give it a shot. Second one is, I would like to see the MVPD try to create a program to help people who have been pulled over. Things have been difficult for the last year and a half. They have fix-it tickets or any tickets, to have a kind of a program to invite them over, help them how to solve the problem. And also a reconciliation program whereby anyone who was arrested before but lives here gets to start a fresh relationship with the PD. Those are my two things. Thank you.
Okay, Member Sandhu, I need to clarify. So the second point you make is, so that if I can play back what I heard, is MVPD has programs how to help folks who've received, how to basically address and resolve tickets they may have received?
Basically, what I'm saying is a lot of folks have gone through a hard time the last year and a half, 2 years. We like to see a program, if it's feasible, to invite anyone with a fix-it ticket that was issued in the city of Mountain View to come and try to address the situation, help them take care of it. If they can write it off, that's fine. If they cannot, at least help them fix the problem so it doesn't happen over and over again. And a reconciliation, part of it be a reconciliation program with those who have arrested and they have this negative relationship with the PD, to start afresh and have try to build a new positive relationship, because we do not want repeat offenders, right? So those are the things I'm interested in.
Okay, thank you for adding that. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Member Wang?
Yeah, cool. So I am also very interested in working on the mental health aspect, and in particular, kind of connecting all the resources we've been talking about, just in regards to youth, connecting people in schools like CHAC, and expanding our crisis response with Uplift, because I've heard people have some, it's hard to actually get that crisis response, especially for juveniles. So connecting that, and continued care, like I think Miriam was saying, so it's more comprehensive. So kind of schools, like immediate crisis response, and then care before or after, in terms of mental health. And then another thing on mental health, kind of looking into whether or not we could have ambulances or the fire department or paramedics call 5150s, which is psychiatric holds, instead of only police officers, I think is the case. Right? Not only, but like mostly police officers. I think that could be a whole thing of its own. And the things that are not on the proposed list, I'd like to look into police training, especially on race and cross-cultural communications, like someone mentioned earlier, and also looking into how we can measure that, and how do we know if changes in policy or if the policies we have right now work. Another thing is, what is the other thing? That's good. Looking into mental health services for police officers in kind of the employee assistance program, and kind of how we can make sure that the officers that we have in our department are healthy, not only physically, but mentally, so that the community can get the best of, you know, what that person has to offer. Yeah, that's it.
Great. Thank you. Member Langdon, would you like to add your 2 cents?
Sure. I do support, the top 3 agenda items presented by Mr. Gaines. And there's 2 things that pique my interest are basically the issue around, in general, police interactions with the public, whether it's a traffic stop or, stopping somebody, or when they get into actually looking into like their record, whether it's a driver history, criminal probation record, just what type of training is around that. And I know they typically can ask for a border probation record because it's an indicator of potential officer safety issues. But I think a lot of times what factors into a prior record is also a decision to enforce. And I'd be curious if there's, an avenue to kind of provide training on the proper use of criminal records, and, to maybe flag people who use them too often, or just anything around, general how a criminal record is used in a traffic stop, or a violent, a domestic violence, or any situation. I'm also curious, just in general, how the prosecutorial section of the department works, and how plaintiffs are, allowed potentially negotiations with the prosecutorial section to get off with continued without a finding, or, avoiding prison, and how often do they try to, basically avoid prison or jail, or, a criminal record being placed on somebody's record, because there's no really way to get that off. I think I did research. I'm curious, about even the topic of removing criminal records. I think the public might find that interesting.
And when you say removing criminal records, could you elaborate a little bit?
I vaguely remember reading something about that's. I mean, I think there's a process if, you're cited, you're criminally found responsible, and you have to actually initiate some sort of petition or whatever to actually get a record removed. And it might be interesting. Well, I don't think we can change that, but to make that more efficient, I don't know.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, Member Wang, you have your hand up.
Yes, Member Langton kind of just reminded me of something else. I think it's pretty similar, and as part of the kind of citation process, I'm interested in, what is it called? Seeing if there's a possibility or a need to implement kind of a board review process in the complaint process of police officers and kind of that investigation. I know there's part of it where there's one person who decides if it's a minor or a major, which is, they get all the information first, but it's there's one person who decides whether it's a minor or kind of a major incident. So then maybe just an idea, a consideration of a board around there that includes not only people within the department, but kind of have general knowledge of law enforcement as well.
Member Wang, just to clarify, do you mean for every incident as it comes up, or a review of the process where those things get determined, just reviewing that in the board and potentially evolving that if needed?
I think kind of looking over the process, and then not necessarily this board, but kind of maybe like a board made of some other people who have more direct knowledge of law enforcement, or study that, and then implementing that in the process later. So kind of examining that process and then,
okay,
yeah, suggesting something.
And suggesting a board made up of people who might be a bit more knowledgeable than us about police procedures and things.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, great. Did I get everyone? Because then I will go. Yes, okay. So my only item is, I'm conscious in the discussions about SROs and the discussion about mental health, we start talking about the role of a sworn officer in some of the activities that go on in those areas. So I would like to, I think I'd like an item, a general item of looking at where else is it appropriate for sworn officers to not respond to calls. So these would obviously be non-criminal matters, right? Like homelessness or neighbor disputes. I think some member Tang was talking about mediators, and or some traffic stops, or there's a homeless person and I don't know what to do, right? So I feel like rather than taking a big topic and then trying to figure out, are there alternative responses, I'd like to also have a topic about where else could there be potentially alternatives for non-sworn officers, but still trained professionals to participate. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking about. And because we've already kind of delved into it around mental health and SROs. So I think that should kind of be a topic on its own. It's kind of where I'm going. So with that, I will look around and see if there's any other comments on the work plan, and I will check in with Mr. Gaines and Mike if you have any other comments or clarifications at this point. If you want to, is there any recap at this point, or you're going to go off and recap? Oh,
We should recap and clarify. So I've been trying to take notes, and I think I misunderstood certain things.
Okay.
So if you'd allow me, I'd like to basically just ask follow-up questions to each member and make sure that I understood clearly the things that they propose. And I'll do that briefly and share my screen to do so.
I think that would be great.
Let's see. Okay, so hopefully I'm still sharing the same thing.
You're good. Oops.
I'll try one more time.
Okay.
All right, so Chair Iyer, you proposed a project to explore where it is appropriate to have sworn personnel respond to calls, non-sworn personnel respond to calls for service. Did I get that correctly?
That is correct. And it could be personnel from the police department, or it could be other professionals. So.
Understood.
Okay.
Member Brodowski, you mentioned that the city is facing a federal lawsuit and the PSAB should examine and be able to say something about the case. Then you also mentioned that the PSAB should be open to examining complaints against the police department in general.
Correct.
All right.
Yes.
Member Langton, I apologize. I missed yours more so than others. I know you had two projects. One was to explore how officers use criminal records and the other was to determine how the prosecutorial section of MPPD operates.
Yeah, I think that's general enough. The only thing I would add is on how office uses, I would say records in general to include driver history or anything that the department has access internally on local matters.
Explore how they use records to make arrest decisions or citations.
Any type of enforcement decision that whether it's arrest or a citation.
Okay.
And yeah, how I think that's broad enough. The prosecutorial section of MBT operates is sufficient.
And can you clarify for that one? Is it just you're just curious?
I guess the reason I'm most curious is there potentially a better way to do it where it really looks at each individual background? Do they sometimes not have a what the hell was it called, like a diversion type program to try and keep people out of the justice system? I guess that's the most thing I'm curious about, is what type of diversion is there for maybe first time offenders or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Member Sandhu, you made comments about the alternative mental health crisis responses, and you specified that you'd like to explore a more detailed relationship with CHAC to have earlier intervention with mental health professionals.
Yes.
Then you also mentioned that you'd like MVPD to create a program to help people resolve. These are automotive tickets, correct?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
That have been issued. And you also mentioned the desire to explore a reconciliation program for formerly incarcerated persons.
With formerly arrested and or incarcerated persons.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Member Tang, you mentioned, forgive my spelling, Joe Alejo lawsuit. You wanted to explore when complaints are made against the police department. How do we ensure that? So that seems similar to what someone else said, Member Brodowski. Then you also asked, how do we ensure that departments that MVPD works with are held to the same standards as MVPD? And I don't think I fully caught your comment about further development of conflict resolution.
Oh, further development of the mediation program that Mountain View has. I believe right now it's like volunteer run, but I would like to see further development of that. I also forgot to mention that I supported the first 3 items of the work plan, and so that's why I was asking that clarifying question earlier.
Gotcha. In the mediation program, are you referring to Project Sentinel, or are you something else?
It might be. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I'll look back at it.
Okay. Member Wang, so you made recommendations in regards to the mental health project, specifying that you'd like to connect all of the resources that are available, expand crisis response, and provide continued comprehensive care that covers pre-crisis, during crisis, and post-crisis. You also posed a question regarding whether or not fire department and paramedics can do 5150 holds instead of police officers. As far as new projects, you mentioned cross-cultural communications. Was this specific to the police department, measuring the police department's multicultural outreach, or could you clarify what your intent was with that?
Yes, so specific to the police department. Or like police, yeah.
And was that like multicultural outreach, multilingual outreach?
Mm-hmm. And then also kind of, I guess that kind of fall into that too, but training around different cultures. Oh, sorry. For the measuring the efficacy of policies, that was not specific. Sorry, but for the cross-cultural communications.
That was
And
not
training.
related to that?
No, sorry.
So measure efficacy of which policies?
Racial training policies. I guess it's kind of connected.
Member Wing, would it be like
Implicit bias training and
bias?
stuff? Yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, you beat me to it.
And thank you for letting me have more than 3, not cutting it off.
Oh, I'll cut it later, don't worry.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. And then you pose a question about mental health of officers, making sure officers have good physical and mental health. And so we've got 3 people have now raised a question of whether or not there's a role for the PSAB in reviewing complaints, or is there another board that should be reviewing complaints against police? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the gist.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will get right on this. Member Tang, you have your hand raised. Did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I wanted, I looked it up, and yes, my mediation item was related to Project Sentinel.
Thank you. All right, Chair Iyer, I have everything that I need, so I'll stop talking and pass back to you.
Okay. Mike, do you have any clarifications or any other questions before we move on from this item?
Nope, it's clear.
Great. Okay, so with that, the next item is board staff comments, questions, and committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the PSAB at this time. Do any PSAB members or staff have comments or questions? Remember, no topic will be deliberated on here, so I will open it up. I don't see anything. I realize I'm the only thing standing between you and the end of this meeting, so I will be quick. I just wanted to encourage everyone on the board, if members of the public or organizations reach out to you to meet with you, that you take the opportunity to hear what they have to say. Nobody's going to force you to talk to anyone you don't want to, but if you do see those approaches as opportunities to learn, I think that would be great, and I would encourage all of you to take advantage of those opportunities to really find out firsthand what people are thinking, what's on their minds. The second item I want to mention is, as we look forward to August meeting, you've already heard mental health as a topic will be coming up in terms of setting up for the work plan. We will be going into work plan recommendations from staff and discussing priorities of those. And Alex Stevenson will be here to give a follow-on update to his the work on the data he's been collecting and reviewing. So that's kind of what's going on for August. If you have any comments on those items in the agenda, please feel free to reach out to me individually or directly to Melvin or to Mike. We would love to hear from you. I don't want anyone to be surprised or not feel listened to in terms of forming that agenda. So I just wanted to say that. Anything else before we adjourn? I appreciate everyone staying up, staying with us. Okay, I think that's it. So I move to adjourn, and this meeting is adjourned at 10:11 p.m. And everyone enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
Right.